Claim me tonight, and I'll be yours forever." The giant widow grinned at the quiet cowboy. Some thought he was shy, some thought he was proud, but Ethan didn't care. He liked his peace. He liked the quiet mornings, the smell of the earth after rain, and the way the wind moved through the tall grass. Life was simple, and he had learned to be content with it. Margaret, on the other hand, was the opposite of quiet. She had lived in Cedar Creek all her life, but she carried herself like she owned every room she entered. People called her the giant widow because she had a presence that could not be ignored. She was tall, strong, and confident. She had lost her husband a few years ago, and since then she had managed everything herself: her farm, her business, and her life. Some said she was cold. Some said she was too proud. But the truth was that Margaret was careful. She had learned that life could be harsh, and she had decided not to let anyone hurt her again. She smiled easily, but rarely showed the kind of softness that people expected from a woman. Their first meeting was not the kind of moment you would expect from a story in a book. It wasn't in a grand hall or during a big celebration. It was on a warm, sunny afternoon on the edge of a field. Ethan was fixing a fence near the old oak tree. He worked with skill, his hands strong and steady. Margaret rode up on her horse, her boots hitting the stirrups with a confident rhythm. She had come to inspect some of the land that she had bought recently, a piece of property that bordered Ethan's family's farm. Ethan noticed her before she spoke. It was hard not to. Margaret had a way of standing out even in the sunlit open fields. She wore a wide-brimmed hat, a long coat, and carried herself like she expected attention. She dismounted gracefully and walked toward him. Her eyes, sharp and clear, watched him as he hammered the last post into the ground. "You're Ethan, aren't you?" she asked. Her voice was firm but calm, not the kind of question that asked for a simple yes or no. It demanded attention. Ethan looked up slowly. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "People say you don't speak much, but what you do is always done right." Margaret smiled slightly, almost as if she wanted to test him. Ethan nodded again, wiping his hands on his pants. "I try. I'll be honest. I plan to use it well, but I also want to make sure it doesn't cause problems for you. I just want to do my work without trouble." Ethan was usually there, working with his team or riding across the fields to make sure everything was in order. Sometimes she would stop and ask questions. Sometimes she just watched him work from a distance. She was learning something she didn't expect. She was enjoying his presence. Ethan, for his part, noticed her too. He had seen many people in Cedar Creek, people who came and went, but Margaret was different. She was not just confident, she was thoughtful. She didn't demand attention, but she noticed things that others overlooked. She asked questions that mattered. She remembered details. And slowly, Ethan found himself looking forward to her visits. It wasn't easy for either of them. Margaret had built walls around herself after losing her husband. She didn't trust easily, and she didn't want to feel vulnerable again. Ethan had been hurt too, though in quieter ways. Life had taught him to keep his emotions close, to avoid trouble, and to value peace above excitement. Yet, despite their differences, there was a connection forming, subtle but undeniable. One afternoon, Margaret arrived at the land while Ethan was repairing a broken gate. The sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows across the field. She approached slowly, as if she were entering a place she respected. "You're working late," she said, not as a complaint but as an observation. Ethan didn't look up immediately. "The fence won't fix itself." She found herself sharing small pieces of her life, stories about her late husband, memories of childhood, and dreams she had put aside. She had never done this with anyone in Cedar Creek, and Ethan listened. He didn't offer advice unless asked. He didn't judge. He simply listened. And that made all the difference. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat on the porch of Margaret's farmhouse. The air was cool and the sky was painted with soft shades of orange and pink. They didn't speak at first. They just sat together, comfortable in the silence. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice soft this time. "I didn't expect to find someone like you here. Someone who doesn't need to prove anything. someone who is honest and steady. It's rare. It was about noticing each other, respecting each other, and feeling a quiet connection that didn't need words. From that day on, Margaret and Ethan's interactions changed. They began to rely on each other more. Ethan's work became easier with Margaret's trust and support. Margaret's life became lighter with Ethan's presence. The townspeople noticed too. Whispers began to circulate, but neither of them cared. Their bond was private, built on trust and understanding. As the season changed, Margaret realized something she hadn't expected. She was starting to feel something deeper for Ethan, something that went beyond respect and friendship. It was a feeling that scared her because it meant letting someone in after years of guarding her heart. Ethan, though quiet as ever, felt it too. He found himself thinking about Margaret when she wasn't around. He wanted to protect her, to help her, to be there for her. But he didn't rush. He didn't speak words he wasn't ready to live by. He simply showed up, day after day, proving his loyalty and care through actions rather than words. The first part of their story ended not with a declaration of love, but with a silent understanding. Margaret looked out over the fields one evening, watching Ethan ride back to his home as the sun dipped below the horizon. She felt a strange, warm hope in her chest. Hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone she could trust completely. And Ethan, back at his small farmhouse, looked at the same sunset from a distance. He felt a calm certainty. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that Margaret mattered to him in a way that was rare and important. The quiet cowboy and the giant widow had met, and in the ordinary rhythms of work and life, a connection had begun, slow, steady, and unbreakable. It was the kind of beginning that didn't shout to the world, but whispered quietly to those who paid attention. Something meaningful had started, and it would grow stronger with time. Autumn had almost passed, and the first hints of winter were touching the fields of Cedar Creek. The air had become crisp, and the mornings carried frost that glimmered like tiny diamonds on the grass. Life went on as usual for Ethan and Margaret, yet the quiet tension between them had grown stronger. They both felt it, the unspoken feelings that lingered in their conversations, in their glances, and in the simple moments they shared. But neither had yet dared to cross the line that might change everything. Margaret had noticed how deeply she cared for Ethan. She had never expected to feel this way. After losing her husband, she had told herself that her life would be about control, independence, and responsibility. She had not planned to let someone enter her life again, not so soon, and certainly not someone as quiet as Ethan. But over the past months, she had realized that strength and kindness could exist together. Ethan's quiet patience, his steady presence, and his honesty had touched something inside her she thought she had buried forever. For Ethan, the feelings were equally complicated. He respected Margaret more than anyone he had ever met. She was strong, independent, and unafraid to speak her mind. He admired the way she handled her land, her business, and even the town's gossip without wavering. Yet beyond admiration, there was a warmth he could not ignore. He wanted to be near her, to share her burdens, and perhaps, one day, to share a life with her. But fear kept him silent. Fear of failure, of misreading her feelings, or of becoming an unwelcome complication in her carefully ordered life. One morning, as frost still clung to the fields, Margaret rode to the edge of her property. Ethan was already there, checking the fences near the old oak tree. He looked up and nodded politely. "Good morning, Ethan," she said. Her voice carried a hint of hesitation, unusual for her. "Morning, Margaret," he replied, his tone neutral but kind. They worked side by side for hours. The cold air made their hands stiff, but neither complained. They spoke little, mostly about the work in the land, but their silence was comfortable, not awkward. There was an understanding between them that did not need words. As the day drew on, Margaret finally broke the silence. "Ethan," she began, her voice softer than usual, "can I ask you something personal?" She looked down at the ground, fidgeting with the reins of her horse. "Do you ever think about more than work, about life, about someone to share it with?" Her eyes met his, and for the first time her usual confidence softened into vulnerability. I understand. I feel the same way. But I also feel that sometimes waiting too long can mean missing something important. He wanted to say something, to tell her that he had felt the same way for months, but the words stuck in his throat. Instead, he nodded, letting the silence hold their unspoken truth. Days passed, and the town's whispers grew louder. Some residents commented openly on Margaret's growing attention toward Ethan. Others warned him to be careful, implying that someone of Margaret's status could not easily be claimed by a quiet cowboy. Ethan heard the gossip, of course, but he ignored it. His concern was not for the town's opinions but for Margaret herself. He respected her too much to act rashly, and he understood that any mistake could harm the trust they had built. Meanwhile, Margaret wrestled with her own doubts. She had never imagined wanting someone so deeply and openly, especially not someone she had once considered an outsider to her world. The thought of losing Ethan, whether through his silence or through circumstances beyond their control, filled her with unease. She realized that waiting for him to make the first move might cost her the chance at something meaningful. One cold evening, Margaret invited Ethan to the farmhouse to help review some plans for the winter work. The house was warm, lit by a crackling fire. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, but inside, the room was peaceful. Margaret poured them both tea and offered him a seat near the fire. They sat together, not talking much at first. The room was quiet, the kind of silence that felt safe. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice firmer now, though still carrying a trace of nervousness. "Ethan, I want to be honest with you," she said. "I don't often let people in. I've spent years protecting myself, making sure no one could hurt me again. But I feel differently with you. I trust you. I care about you. And I don't want to wait to tell you that." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on his. "I'm not asking for promises," she continued. "I'm not asking for words that might be empty. I just want you to know how I feel. And if you feel the same, then maybe we can face whatever comes together." Finally, someone had given voice to the feelings he had carried silently for months. I feel the same," he admitted quietly. "I've felt it for a long time, but I didn't know how to say it." For a moment, the world outside seemed to disappear. There were no expectations, no judgments, just two people who had found something rare and precious in each other. That night marked a turning point. Their relationship changed from quiet curiosity and mutual respect into something deeper. There were no grand declarations, no dramatic gestures, just honesty, trust, and the knowledge that they had chosen to step into each other's lives. But life, as it often does, did not pause for emotions. Challenges came quickly. A shipment of supplies for Margaret's farm was delayed, causing work to fall behind schedule. A few townspeople continued to gossip, subtly questioning whether Ethan was the right choice for someone like Margaret. Even business matters required careful attention, and Margaret had to balance her growing feelings with her responsibilities. Through it all, Ethan remained steady. He worked tirelessly, ensuring that nothing went wrong. He offered advice only when necessary and supported Margaret quietly, proving that his commitment was not just in words but in action. Margaret, in turn, found herself leaning on him more than ever. She trusted his judgment, appreciated his patience, and valued the calm strength he brought into her life. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly across the fields, Margaret and Ethan walked together to the edge of her property. The white flakes settled on their coats and hats, creating a serene and magical scene. "I never imagined life could feel like this," Margaret admitted softly. "So peaceful and yet so full of meaning. But when it happens, you know it. You don't have to question it anymore." They understood that life would continue to challenge them, that responsibilities and obstacles would arise, but they also knew that they could face anything together. Their bond had been tested by time, patience, and quiet observation, and it had grown stronger because of it. That night, as they returned to the farmhouse, the snow continuing to fall gently, Margaret felt a sense of peace she had not known since before her loss. Ethan felt the same, a quiet happiness that came not from words or promises, but from action, trust, and shared understanding. The turning point had come. The quiet cowboy and the giant widow had acknowledged their feelings, chosen to face life together, and committed, without drama or haste, to a partnership built on respect, honesty, and care. They did not yet know what the future held, but they knew that they would meet it side by side. And in that moment, as the snow settled over the land, both of them understood something essential. Love, trust, and loyalty were not born in a single moment. They grew quietly, steadily, and meaningfully, just like the land they both cared for so deeply. Winter had settled firmly over Cedar Creek, covering the fields and rooftops with a soft, quiet blanket of snow. The world seemed slower, calmer, but life for Ethan and Margaret was busier than ever. The season brought work to the farm, preparation for the next year, and the subtle, daily challenges of managing land, animals, and responsibilities. Yet, despite all the practical demands, their relationship had grown stronger. They had crossed the line from unspoken feelings into a shared life, and the quiet confidence they found in each other gave them courage for the days ahead. Margaret had learned something important over the past months. Love and partnership were not about grand gestures or declarations, but about presence, trust, and consistent effort. She saw it every day in Ethan. He worked beside her without complaint, helped her make decisions, and quietly proved that he could be relied upon in every circumstance. He was not perfect, of course. He had his own fears, his own quiet struggles, but he was steady, honest, and patient. That steadiness became a source of strength for Margaret, who had once thought she had to handle everything alone. For Ethan, the winter was a season of clarity. He had grown to care for Margaret deeply, not out of obligation or duty, but because he genuinely wanted to be part of her life. Her confidence, her intelligence, and her warmth had touched him in ways he had never experienced before. He admired her strength but also cherished the moments when she allowed herself to be gentle, vulnerable, and open. In those moments, he felt the quiet certainty that he wanted to share his life with her, not someday, but always. Their days followed a comfortable rhythm. Morning chores, tending animals, checking fences, and managing supplies filled most of their time. But in the evenings, they found ways to connect beyond work. Sometimes they sat by the fire in Margaret's farmhouse, sharing stories, small jokes, or quiet reflections about the day. Sometimes they walked together across the snow-covered fields, speaking of plans for the next season or simply enjoying the peace of the land. In every interaction, trust and care grew, layer by layer. The town, which had once whispered and speculated about the unlikely connection between the quiet cowboy and the confident widow, began to take notice in a different way. People saw Ethan's consistent presence, his quiet support of Margaret's work, and the mutual respect between them. The gossip faded, replaced with a cautious admiration. Some even approached Margaret to compliment her choice, though she never sought validation. It was a reminder that genuine connection often proves itself over time, quietly and without need for spectacle. One cold morning, Ethan noticed that a fence near the northern boundary had collapsed under the weight of snow. He set out to repair it immediately, but Margaret insisted on accompanying him, determined to help. Together they cleared the snow, carried heavy wooden posts, and worked side by side. The labor was hard, the wind bit at their faces, and the frost made every movement more difficult. Yet, amidst the struggle, there was laughter, encouragement, and the simple joy of working together. "Careful with that post," Margaret said, steadying the timber as Ethan lifted it into place. "I've got it," Ethan replied, though he allowed her hands to guide him for a moment. The brief touch lingered, unnoticed by the world but meaningful to both. By the time the work was done, their clothes were damp, their hands stiff, and their cheeks flushed from the cold, but neither complained. Instead, they walked back to the farmhouse, carrying a quiet satisfaction that comes only from shared effort and accomplishment. Winter brought unexpected challenges beyond the farm. A shipment of supplies was delayed due to icy roads, threatening the schedule of repairs and planting plans for the spring. Margaret felt the stress immediately, but Ethan's calm approach reassured her. He devised practical solutions, adjusted plans, and worked tirelessly to ensure that everything stayed on track. Margaret watched him closely, realizing that his strength was not just in physical work but in problem-solving, patience, and resilience. She felt proud, not because of his success, but because she knew she could depend on him completely. As the snow deepened and the nights grew longer, Margaret and Ethan spent more time inside the farmhouse, talking about the future. They spoke cautiously, respecting the seriousness of the choices before them. Margaret admitted her fears, the possibility of losing what they had, the challenges of blending their lives, and the uncertainties of life itself. Ethan responded with quiet honesty, acknowledging his own doubts but expressing his commitment. Their words were simple, often understated, but they carried the weight of true intention. One evening, after a long day of work and careful planning, Margaret prepared a small dinner for the two of them. They sat by the fire, the room glowing with warmth and soft light. Margaret finally spoke of something that had been on her mind for months. "I've learned something important," she said. "Life doesn't always give second chances. I don't want to waste the one I have with you." No hesitation, no doubt. They celebrated small victories, successfully repaired fences, animals thriving, preparations for spring completed, and supported each other through challenges. They argued occasionally, as any two people in close partnership would, but their disagreements were never personal. Instead, they used them to grow, to understand each other better, and to build a stronger foundation for the life they were creating together. The first signs of spring approached, melting the snow and revealing the fields ready for planting. Ethan and Margaret worked tirelessly to prepare for the season. They plowed fields, repaired barns, and planned crop rotations. Their efforts were coordinated, balanced, and full of cooperation. Margaret had grown to admire Ethan not just as a companion, but as a capable partner who understood the land, the work, and the rhythms of life. Ethan, in turn, appreciated Margaret's vision, intelligence, and the way she balanced strength with compassion. Through it all, their relationship became visible to the town in a new light. People no longer whispered with curiosity or suspicion. They observed with quiet respect. Margaret and Ethan were no longer the widow and the quiet cowboy. They were a team, united by shared purpose, mutual respect, and deep affection. One afternoon, after completing the planting preparations, they sat together near the edge of the property, watching the sun lower in the sky. The field stretched before them, full of potential and promise. The air was warm with the first hints of spring, carrying the scent of fresh soil and new beginnings. Margaret rested her head lightly against Ethan's shoulder. "I've never imagined life could feel so balanced," she said softly. "Strong, challenging, but also safe. With you, I feel like I can face anything." Love was not a sudden blaze, it was a steady warmth. Trust was not a promise made once. It was proven every day through actions, patience, and care. And partnership was not about controlling or protecting, but about supporting, understanding, and choosing each other repeatedly, in small and meaningful ways. As the seasons changed, Ethan and Margaret continued to build their life together. The farm thrived, the animals were healthy, and the land was productive. Their partnership grew in both strength and depth. They celebrated small victories and comforted each other through minor setbacks. They faced public scrutiny when necessary, but always with a shared front, showing that unity and trust were more powerful than gossip or criticism. Margaret, once a woman who relied only on herself, learned the quiet joy of shared life. She experienced support, love, and companionship that did not threaten her independence but enhanced it. Ethan, once reserved and careful, found a partner who saw him fully, trusted him completely, and allowed him to express his care without fear or hesitation. By the time spring was fully in bloom, Cedar Creek had come to respect and admire the bond between the quiet cowboy and the giant widow. Their connection had been tested, nurtured, and proven genuine. It was not built on fleeting emotions or dramatic declarations, but on consistent, honest, and patient choices. One evening, as the sky turned golden and the fields shimmered with new growth, Margaret and Ethan stood together at the edge of their land. They looked out over the farm, the animals, and the life they had built. Words were unnecessary. The warmth in their hearts, the trust in their eyes, and the quiet certainty in their gestures said everything. They had chosen each other. They had faced challenges, shared responsibilities, and built a life grounded in honesty, respect, and love. And in that choice, repeated day after day, they had found their forever.